can you or anybody else risk putting out on the table exactly how love helps, transmutes, or unstoppers the process of intuition? How does love relate to intuition? I mean, I think it's a great word. It's certainly used it a tremendous amount. And of course, one of the most telling things he ever said to me was that we were talking about why he did so many discourses on meditation. And I said, Baba, why didn't you ever give me a meditation? I've told you this story, but I remind you of it. And he said, well, Don, that's a good question. It's simply because now, during my manifestation, and for some time afterwards, the path of love, which is the high road of all roads to realization, the road to realization, he didn't say love was realization, but it was a road to realization, is open. But in the future, and he didn't say how much in the future, there are all sorts of people who say it'll be 100 years, no, it's going to be 75 years, no, it's going to be 250 years. Some of them say, no, it's never going to happen, and we had that assurance from Baba. But Baba said to me, in the future, the gate to the road of love will gradually narrow until it is relatively inaccessible to humanity. And at that point, then the highest of the secondary routes, which is meditation, will have to be used as the path to God. So he is saying that relatively, and apparently I had the impression from him that for a majority of the time in creation, the path of love is not open to humanity in its meditation. But he said, during that time when the path is open, then it is a relative waste of time to meditate. And he did not say, therefore, do not meditate. Don't get me wrong. But he just said, this high road, and it's a tough, rocky road, you can be sure of that, is open. So use that. But then he said, and then it will gradually narrow. So we've got a pretty big challenge there to answer in ourselves. If it's not available, then what is the road of love on the route to God? And what are the other things that can be of help? Apparently love is not the only thing, and at times it's not even going to be the most important thing. He said, then meditation is more important. These are the direct words from Baba. You know, you just can't sit around and say, Baba, I wish it wasn't that way, I'd prefer it was another way. He just lays out what it is. And then we have to accept it and go on and say, well, what are the implications of that then? This is important. To me, this simply said, okay, you darn well better start reflecting and intuiting upon what are the important keys to the path to realization. What are all the things that can be of help? And try to use them. Even not just meditation, when love is relatively closed out. Here you see is where the faculty of intuition has got to come in. We need to reflect on these things, and we need to start now. Because it might be that Baba's manifestation is not finished in 75 years. My golly, he's already been out of the body for 40 some odd, you know. So we may even be over the halfway point when love is available. So we're going to have grandchildren and maybe even children. We're going to have to do a lot of their work without much of the dynamics of love involved. Am I talking crazy? Or is this realistic? I think we've just got to be realistic. Baba's preparing us. And it's up to us to say, okay, if it's that way, then I'm going to have to prepare myself. I'm going to have to maybe be of help to some other people. Because I am sure, sitting right here, are a number of people who are going to have to be of help. Because Baba's going to say, this person's going to be of help to me, help some of my devotees along the road. And my gosh, we can't trip over our shoestrings when we try to be of help, can we? We've got to avoid it if we can. Yes, please.
Gentlemen, I'd like to beg your indulgence and everyone else too, but I'm having a very strong intuition right now. I'm probably just about to make a complete fool of myself.
Let's all be fools
I'm
together.
very uncomfortable with you sitting under that light, barely hooked to that beam up there. Can we please take a step to correct that thing, just to give me peace of mind?
I thought you were going to knock our conference on intuition on the cocktail. And here he is being literal.
We'll get to that one.
Yeah.
Actually, it wouldn't fall out anyway, so.
It's okay, it's tacked on the backside. The cord would stop it from going down, yeah.
Ah, you're just on the wrong side of the
Thank you,
pillar.
Steve. See, that's.
But thank you for the thought, your observation.
it's about to come off.
When I looked at it, I thought, oh my God, poor Tom. There we are.
Well,
So does that relate to how, we're going to have generations coming after us? That window might be, we have this flood of love from Bob right now. And like you're saying,
He says it is-
you might just get, well, I just fall on him. But it comes down to, you just do, all you can do is align yourself as much as possible on that bumpy road, individualize yourself with Bob. And then Bob will work through us to everybody else.
Wait, because you talk about the passive attitude to this. And that's not my nature, you see. So I got to rise up and say, wait.
Yes.
And what you say is we've got to, as it were, put ourselves in Bob's hands and he's going to work it out so it works out properly. But that doesn't coincide with the concept of the commitment of work that Bob emphasized again and again to me.
You can do it physically, take care of the lab physically. So
So
that's how
somebody's got to do the
dynamics
work. Yeah, we have got to do some work involved in this. But the first work to do is for ourselves. Baba made that amply clear that the high priority of it all is get your own shop in order and get your own show along and do the investment that's necessary. And if you do a good job on that, then I may choose you to help me with my universal work. But I will only do that if it helps you further. But your first responsibility is to yourself. And that means a tall order of work. That Bob emphasized to me many times. I just can't, I had no indication at any time from Baba that this popular idea is if you have a problem, put it in Baba's arms and then trust in him, Baba just didn't say it that way to me. And I didn't see him treat the Mandali that way either. He'd give them a job to do, it was clear, they would report back. If they did a good job, Baba would pat them on the back and that was it. If they hadn't succeeded, Baba would find why they had been stupid and lazy, and he'd bawl the hell out of them, quite frankly. And so they would go back, really shaken up many times. But Baba insisted he would give an assignment, and by gosh, you go do it. You exercise your ingenuity. And if it seems impossible to you, you don't say, well, then it's Baba's will, and it's not meant to be. No, then you find the impossible way. When I saw Baba push Dr. Duncan through this process 3 times in New York until even that stalwart Duncan was practically crushed and in tears, and the 3rd time he did the impossible. But the 2 times he came back and said, Baba, I tried this and that and t'other thing, and pointed out to Baba why it was impossible, then Baba said, you haven't done a good job, and he pushed him back. You see how it works? By golly. So you don't just say, well, it's Baba's will, and that's it. Even this famous statement, do your best, and then leave it in Baba's hands, is not good enough under those criteria, because your best is your judgment of what is best. But the best is Baba's best, and by God, you better be aware of it. Does this sound tough?
It sounds tough.
It's tough, but it's realistic. And the reward of it is, by golly, when you do the thing well, you feel good about it, and you got Baba's love. Then you know you've done what really should be done. And you can go on to the next tough one. Yes, Billy.
For people like yourself or Dr. Duncan who received assignments directly from Baba, is one thing, would you say that intuition is one way we kind of get our assignments from Baba?
I think at the present time it largely comes that way. And I would tell you what I would take as a typical example. You've got a center here. There are various different problems involved at the present time, which are tough problems. And they need quite a great deal of, I should say, hard work and various fitting together of ideas from different people and harmonizing of viewpoints. An awful lot of tough challenges are involved here. And I think personally that it's going to take a great deal of intuition in Baba's arms to solve and work out properly these things. It is going to be, in the long run, an intuition of how to go about things which seem to be virtually insoluble from different directions because the various demands seem almost mutually contradictory at certain points. So I think we're a typical joint group venture where intuition is desperately needed, and everybody needs to start throwing it in, and above all, the elasticity of the manner in which intuition works. I'm sorry, I hope I haven't stepped too far over out of my own bailiwick, Ken?
Well, you know, in that vein, what I noticed when I was on the board last year, the toughest part for me was began to see the mirror of people, myself and them, and those individuals that I had difficulties with were actually, as I took it back in my quiet time and I sat with it, I began to see really more of me that I was very uncomfortable with. And so I had to be with that without...
But you had deliberately made yourself vulnerable, Ken.
Yes,
you
I
did as
made
a
myself
conscious act.
vulnerable and I was
I
conscious.
thought that was very brave.
And I also, when I had hurt someone's feelings, I also had to come to terms with, I also had to have that person in my prayers. I also had to send them cards and try to, you know, be somewhat, but I had to first acknowledge it. I didn't have to sit here and explain it to myself. And nor did I have to defend myself either. I felt like what I needed to do was be with it. And being with it, I had to realize for myself it was a matter of having used to doing things and making decisions myself in my own business. So suddenly I had to learn how to be open-hearted and listen and realize it's a group decision. And so for myself, having to see my own immaturity, see my own sense of lack and my own not really understanding Baba's orders at all, I had to really feel pretty shitty.
Well, it is a huge challenge, and as we discussed
But no,
about...
he's not on the board this year.
Yeah. It's a huge challenge, and one really does...
Too many carbon atoms.
I made too many errors, karmic errors.
Yes, yeah, Mahu.
You know, it's very interesting for me, Don, because you certainly are opening a new chapter, at least for me. Reason being, at least for past 6 months, I don't know, 4 months, I don't know the numbers quite right, but I've been trying to really, put my life based on this, what I've learned from Baba, like this provisional ego, and try to put...
Good for you to bring that up, but go ahead. Let's be sure we remember what Baba does for the provisional ego, and we'll go back to it.
Yes.
But you go on with that important history.
Yes. So, by having that in mind, it's like put Baba in, in the beginning of whatever I do, or I start, my morning and doing my work in my office and so forth, and even drinking a cup of coffee, just as much as I remember. And then, of course, by the end of the night, dedicate and offer it to him and so forth. And I notice a little bit of change of behavior in myself. And right or wrong, I don't know. But I've seen that, I don't know whether I'm in the right place, like this surrenderance, like being in surrender, and then putting Baba, like how much effort really I'm putting in. And if I'm trying my best, I always try to remember this, just re-emphasize, I just keep on remembering that Baba said, do your best. He never said, don't worry, be happy. I will help you, with the result. Just say, do your best, then don't worry, be happy. I will. And then, as you said, our best is our best. And it's not necessarily Baba's best.
Exactly.
So the question is, do we put enough effort, or are we having a passive attitude toward being surrenderance or surrendering to Baba? So that's my
I suppose
question.
doing your best, which is Baba's best, means don't surrender prematurely.
Okay.
Do that again.
Yeah, that's
Can the difference
In surrendering to Baba and leaving it with him, don't surrender too fast. Have you done his best? And not kidded yourself, well, I've done my best. But is it really his best? And that means, doing a quantum leap beyond what you think is normally to be expected of you. You've got to be tough on yourself, Because by gosh, when I would see Baba hammer him onto it, he would demand the impossible of him. And I would think, like, gee whiz, Baba's being brutal. But, he was stretching them to find their own reserves of what is reality's best, which is Baba's best, and not their limited version of, well, I'm hindered here and that's not possible, and so on. I often thought that, often came to my mind, after I really came directly under Baba's thumb, that he never assigns us something which is impossible. We can say, oh, God, I've done everything that I possibly can. And then you say, but if you've got that blessed, stubborn conviction that he does not give you something impossible, either there's an external solution that he's working for, or there is an internal solution that is perhaps often even more important than the external thing. And so somewhere or another, he's got something that's got to be worked through. But he has given that as something which is possible, has to be done. Not because he has manufactured that situation for you. It's your own karma that he's dealing with. And he didn't make your karma. You made your own karma, as a matter of fact. And you started doing it long before there was an avatar, even when you were a cute little gas atom. So it's been going on, you see, and on and on and on and on. And so he's helping you with the things that you have built up over extraordinary periods of time. He didn't manufacture it. He's not going to solve it for you, but he's going to be with you. He's going to help you with strength. He's going to do his best to clarify. He's going to do his best to put you in situations which will bring it out most clearly and sharply what has to be done. But he didn't manufacture those tough situations. They're simply necessary in order to work through something that your own karma says has to be worked through. But let's go back to your phrase, the provisional ego.
No, before we go there, can I get clarification from you, please?
Yeah, I'll do my best to muddy it for you, Sharia.
Thank you. I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, or
Good.
play a mind game here.
I see your horns already.
Thank you. You see the tail. You said that our best is not necessarily Baba's best, and then your solution to finding Baba's best was to say that don't give up prematurely.
Exactly. Don't surrender
Don't
prematurely.
surrender prematurely.
Don't surrender even to Baba prematurely. That's
Well,
exactly what I meant.
Now, short of making that into don't surrender period, then I can argue that my prematurely may not be Baba's prematurely.
It's
So
a
are you
good devil's
saying-
advocate.
Are you saying simply don't surrender?
I'm not saying don't surrender. All I'm saying is give yourself and give yourself the chance and the push to find a new level of performance that you've never reached before in a given field. And see what happens. I mean, this is hellishly challenging. And boy, it certainly reveals you at levels you never even suspected before. It's interesting. Push yourself to go beyond that you have known your capabilities and endurance to be. But don't do it constantly and regularly, because Baba gives you a rest time. And it's just as important to recognize the rest time that you are meant to have to recuperate, because you can become a workaholic and push. And when you come to what I call the little neutral plateau, which is built into your own life, you don't even bother to rest your foot there and rest for a few moments. So rest. When you have suddenly the instinct, my golly, the pressure's off for the moment, but I ought to do that, I ought to do it. No. Rest there for a few moments and forget all of these things. And then when your own deep instinct says, okay, I've caught my breath, and I think it's time to go on climbing again, you do. So at the same time that you push yourself to do beyond what you've ever thought you could do, also you've got the challenge. Don't overdo it. And when there is a natural time of rest, which you will know instinctively, you will have a suspicion it's arrived, because things will show it to you. And do your rest and be sweet and calm about it and profit by it. So it isn't a question of never surrendering. Shall we go back to provisional ego? Okay. Somebody remember what Baba says about the provisional ego? Who wants to risk their neck on the chopping block? Nobody's got it chopped off yet today. We've had some awfully spot-on contributions, don't you think? Golly, everybody's really in there. Yes?
Maybe I can contribute to that. It's a little something that I wrote. I suppose it's out of the discourses, and I think it ties in with the provisional ego. And it's a statement which I think Baba gave to us, where he said, it is not I who is doing this, but it is the Master who is getting it done through me. And that just popped into my mind. As I think somewhat correlated.
Absolute dead key on. That's a wonderful contribution. This is a typical example of what Baba gives when he's taking up, let's say, generally the process of the provisional ego. In his discourses, he doesn't say this belongs chapter 2 of the provisional ego and this is chapter 1, but he gives us these various different building blocks, how to build the provisional ego, which is Baba as the provisional ego. But what is his specific definition of when you have constructed the provisional ego without knowing it, of course? What's the characteristic of it? You remember? It's a wonderful little bit.
I remember what Bob said, but I think of self-confidence in your own actions, of going with you.
Not down self-confidence. It's a very simple criterion that he points out to it. When my good becomes more important to you than your good or your happiness, then I become your provisional ego. And that's real. That's for real. That simply means that, I forget about all these funny little things that I think that I want to get my jacket cleaned again, and new shoes because these are falling apart and so on. And I look over at Baba's sandals, and I look at the manner in which his neck is getting really more and more painful to him all of the time, and it just kills me to see it all. And these are the things that really strike way deep down inside of me. And I don't stop living, I don't stop eating, I don't stop trying to make some good food for myself. I do my best to take care of the household Stevens, but they don't have that final importance to me anymore. It really is Baba who has the importance, and the things that I think will make him happy. Whenever, as I was telling Adele earlier on today, that I talk to a part of my body, I finish off by saying, so that we can do, and I'm very specific about it, the particular series of seminars that I think Baba intends us to do. That's the end game. I say, look, we ought to hold out and do a good job for that. It's specific to that. And so I say, let's do a good job to get it done, to do Baba's will, and I hope it makes him happy. Just very simply put. We're still in the middle of provisional ego, so you add something to it.
Provisional ego?
Yeah.
Well, let's just finish that up.
To finish the provisional ego. All right. The provisional ego, let's say, Baba then goes on to explain the personal ego. when the provisional ego, let's say, occupies the center of attention of the devotee and it's deep and sincere, then the provisional ego, and here I have to just, I have to think in terms of bottles and horses and sidewalks and concrete things like that. So I always think that when Baba becomes the provisional ego, our own personal ego goes into the deep freeze. It isn't eliminated, but it goes into the deep freeze. And Baba says when this goes into the deep freeze, as it were, it fractures. It cracks up. When something goes through stress patterns, through a terrible temperature change, there's a cracking that goes on, which is incredible. The ice, that goes into granite in the wintertime in a mountain top and splits and fissures, a great big solid piece of rock. Well, this is what the provisional ego is. So the personal ego is fractured, and it never recovers from this. But in this process that Bob is describing, it's very apparent that when the avatar sees that the process of provisional ego has been put into effect and has produced the necessary results, and the personal ego is fractured and it's never going to recover, you get the responsibility put back on your own shoulders. So the techniques that were involved in establishing the provisional ego do not go on eternally. And he also points out that there is another danger which can come along. He points it out not just, let's say, for the avatar, but for any great master. If you have gone through and are in the middle of the provisional ego process with a master, and that master drops his body, Baba gives us a warning, and you have to be careful, because he says, just very simply, that the process of the person of the provisional ego is so delicate that it calls for constant adjustments to be made in the relationship. And if the personal master is not there in the flesh to see these through, then real damage can occur. So what that says is, okay, the process of making the master the provisional ego is tremendously effective, but be careful if the personal master is not there in the process. I've seen too many people make Baba the provisional ego when he wasn't around, and then start blaming him for everything that comes along, And so then the provisional ego, instead of being a positive process, is a destructive process. So we've got to be realistic about these things. Have a care with the technique of the provisional ego. So that's why I always say to people who say, Baba makes everything and does everything, is responsible, and I just release it to him. This is typical of the provisional ego process. But if he is not there to say, you're overdoing it, and by golly, I've got to give you a real reading out as he did to Duncan, how does the correction process go through? Be careful, be careful. Don't overdo it. I think it is absolutely magnificent to love Baba, but be careful, you still got even more personal responsibilities that you've got to see through if he's not there right in the flesh to supervise when you start getting a bit unbalanced in certain phases of the process. Joyce, you wanted to say something there.
Well, one word comes very clear, is very resounding in this latest discussion, and that is practical. And in your books that I'm in the process of reading, I read about 3 of it, some from here, some and your biography.
My Baba's biography, excuse me.
Baba's biography.
Excuse me, Joyce, I'm a stickler, as you know. There we are. Go ahead, sweetie.
You constantly bring out the practicality, your practicality. And this is something that has come into my consciousness in my journey, is practical. And this is something that I wanted to kind of put out, that the practical, to test certain things, in checking and testing, what is practical in what we're being required of, or what is happening. And
We've
I just
got
wanted-
responsibilities there, Joyce. I'm glad you pointed it out. The practicality, and of all of the people I've ever known and watched do things in the practical world and see how Baba functioned, I just have to say his sense of practicality was extraordinary, absolutely incredible. I could see him plan out, let's say, a sabhas or meeting and go over the various practical details of it carefully. And then when something would come along to upset them, he would go carefully into the rearrangements that had to be made with Padre. And by God, the budget was still the budget. It wasn't tossed into the ash can.
And in practicality, I don't think of just material aspects of living. It's practical as far as relationships and what it's, the effect it's going to have on other people, of what decision you make. Does that make sense?
Well, it sure does. You know, you were certainly constantly made aware of the fact by Baba that your relationship to that person and that devotee and that group was top priority.
So
And
then you
don't
can't-
be debonair about that relationship.
And so-
Handle it carefully.
Now,
Go ahead.
when you are looking at it that way, you can't just consider your own personal ego. It puts a distance between what you desire as being something to push ahead.
Sure.
If you're looking for those other aspects in a situation.
Yeah, that's a good point you raised, Joyce. But do remember, before we leave the subject of the provisional ego, that even when the master is there, Baba made it very clear, certainly to me while he was in the body, that the process of the provisional ego, when it had cracked the ego, was then terminated by Baba. And a lot of responsibilities that perhaps he had temporarily shouldered for you one way or another to give you a sense of security and to crack that blessed ego, then he put them back on your shoulders. It didn't go on indefinitely. I think this is an awfully important point. What would you add here?
I just want to ask you one thing that you were addressing to us. In reference to provisional ego, you said that the self-ego must go through some adjustments. What kind of adjustments were you?
The personal ego?
Yeah.
No, it is a fracturing, a fissuring. In other words, there are great big, what are cracks that develop in it. And even a terribly strong, solid thing, when you put some fairly fundamental cracks in it, you can break it up pretty easily from there on. And that is what Baba emphasized. Baba wasn't going to stick around and be the provisional ego until it had all disappeared. He didn't take that on. He simply was there in that capacity as your practical ego for you in place of your own blessed personal ego. He was there for a while, but only to get the fundamental cracks made, and then you inherit back your problems and having to worry and fuss and stew about them. And then it goes on in a natural process, but because now you can make use of daily life and the problems that it presents to continue the fracturing and the pulverizing process. It's going to be the natural, this is the old Sufi realization of the daily life as being the spiritual teacher, the spiritual laboratory. So it's going to continue it. But if you've got that wonderful boon of having a great master accept you for a while, and he put up with you through the provisional ego process, and he gives it back to you, and in daily life you carry on from there. Yes?
John, is that, how is that relevant for us in our relationship with Mayor Baba now that he has dropped the body? Does that mean that we as Baba lovers don't have the option open to us to exercise this tool?
Provisionally. I feel that it is not closed to us, but I think that a person has the added responsibility to have a sense when he may be overusing it. And I think it is a wonderful thing, again, if he's got one or two or three or four trusted companions around to help him in the process and say, careful now, you're starting to blame Baba for things that are not correct in that context. Billy?
I've heard a lot of times people talk about the honeymoon period with Baba. They come to Baba and it's this total sweetness. Maybe in one sense that's when he is forming to some degree or another the provisional ego. He is carrying it, and then people say, and now Baba's just got me unbelievably burdened or something. And that's when he puts it back to us. I don't know, it just popped into my head.
Well, I think it's a good intuition, and I call it an intuition because I think it has real grains of value in exactly what you say. But I also think that this is a type of intuition, Billy, where you leave the door open for a further phase to that intuition and further insight. My own personal experience has been now over quite a few months that a really important intuition in an important field of one's life starts with a great big bang and some awfully important things develop. And then a little later some more add in, and I've been used to the fact that an important intuition goes through a process of development over a period of months and even years. And you have to follow it through patiently and allow it its growth, and don't get impatient. Don't try to force it to some conclusion that you want desperately to have right in front of you. Let it take its time. So an awful lot of patience is involved in this. But I would say take that back into your own reflective self and reflect on it every once in a while. Just sort of ask yourself, sort of pose a question mark to the subconscious. Let it drift off into the subconscious. Don't feel bothered about it, or don't give any time period to it, and wait until the next chapter comes out. And almost certainly it will come out, and it'll be another exciting part of the story. So how the provisional ego can or should work, but it has to do with the honeymoon period, which has always fascinated me. I've heard a lot less about the honeymoon period lately, incidentally. But back in the 60s and 70s, God, it was around all the time, even when Baba was still in the flesh, particularly when he was in the flesh. So, at any rate, it is a very moot point. It's important. Yes, Nancy.
Oh, well, I want to ask a question about intuition as related to creativity.
Mm-hmm. We haven't touched on that, have we? In other words, a painting of a landscape, things of that sort, creative writing.
Yeah, creative writing, creative music, whatever. Do you feel that's usually colored? Or
well,
it can be or it can't?
I've been fascinated in creative writing actually ever since I was in my teens. And every once in a while, I just sat myself down and said every day I'll do at least 20, 30 minutes of just writing on something that captures my mind. And I would do it. And maybe once in 2-3 months, something would come out as a real gem. And then I would say, well, that was really an intuitive writing. And I always noted it wrote itself. It was interesting. I could be writing away and I could watch and analyze my mental processes. And what I saw really astonished me. My mind was occupied with whether I was writing straight across or starting to go up and downhill on the sheet. It was also related to whether I was using roughly the correct grammar, things of that sort. More mechanical. But the basic thoughts, the basic ideas, the basic structure just sprang out, you know. And but those jewels were fairly rare. And I've had in recent times, I would say, more examples in my life of creative writing. And I think what goes on here is, and I'm glad you mentioned this because it's one of the most important points, I'm absolutely dead convinced when you and Baba have worked together really hard in the harness and managed to bring a pretty big, important samskara in your makeup under control, and it's no longer rampaging around and saying, by God, it's got to be this way, we got to get rid of that, I got to get old Billy under control, and things like that. And, you know, it's really under control. You're still active in the field, but you're no longer compulsed in the field. When that happens, it's as if a whole segment of intuitive creativity in that area of your makeup is freed. And it has acted as a stopper, I mean, just like a plug in a tub is and the water goes through. And it's amazing what one samskara can do. And when I got rid of the samskara, I was thinking that all samskaras were negative, horrible, the devil, you know. And suddenly at the Tsonk clinic, after I saw that drying myself off after a shower was a great habit pattern, and that habit patterns can be benevolent and very useful, and I suddenly said, my God, I would never really thought of that. The whole field of samskaras that's important, that's fundamental importance, opened up like a flower in just the course of a few short weeks. And one of the whole basic building blocks of creation suddenly made sense to me and it fitted into place. And that just because of the fact that from the time I first read that from our first human incarnation, consciousness is complete and we're only blocked from knowing our Godhood consciously by the samskaras which test over reality. That's why I thought they were all negative. And I've never seen the possibility that in creation there is a whole huge phase where they're not only there, but they are basic and essential. And they are really the fundamental, creating the complexity on which the complexity of really God consciousness can be manifested. Is that important? When I saw that, the whole thing, it just opened out at an incredible speed. And there was that one thing, they're bad. Now, isn't that amazing that that simple samskara could have blocked off that whole side, then it all flooded out intuitively. And it came rapidly intuitively, and it was exciting. And it still goes on. But there are other fields of God speaks that open up in exactly the same way. But we have blocks, samskaric blocks, to our subconscious knowledge of reality, truth, which block off our intuitive access to them. And sometimes they start getting a little bit leaky. And then, you know, once you get a bit of a fissure in the dam, it gets weaker and weaker. So there's also that process. But the one on samskaras, Baba put me in the circumstance when it got knocked out in a week. And it was phenomenal to see what happened.
You know, I found it interesting because I've read about some writers' lives, and I know one in particular, I'm thinking of a novelist, who said that she never really even recalled, that it just almost was like completely channeled to her. Mm-hmm. Like she just heard it or just...
Now this is perfectly possible, because this is another aspect that we had to start talking over in Atlanta. Is there some relationship between what we call intuition functioning and, let's say, entity transmission or occult transmission of some sort that can get entangled in it? It's another thing that one just has to look at and say. But let me put what I think to me is an absolutely fundamental cardinal about intuition. Intuitive knowledge risks a minimum of putting aside of this vertical structure of command in each individual. And when I talk about the vertical structure of command, I mean here's the drop zone, here's the mental body, here's the subtle body, and here's the physical body. And in normal functioning, all of this is self-contained and going from top to bottom and bottom to top. And it's a beautiful, beautiful structure. But one of my old friends, and I've told you about her a little bit in the past, Catherine Alstrom up in San Francisco, was a fantastic person and knew an awful lot about the dangers of various types of occult phenomena. Said, well, Don, there is one thing. If an individual becomes involved in a process where the conscious decisional functioning of himself is set aside and there is room made or the possibility for an outside entity to come in and use the rest of the vertical line of command. It's something like breaking the leg of a chair. And when you break it, yes, you can get out some good glue. So when you put your own command structure back together again, you get out of the trance or the automatic writing or whatever you've been involved in, and you go on, all right, you can put the vertical line of command back in functioning. and it seems to go on all right. But she said, you can glue the leg on the broken chair once or twice or 3 times, but gradually it becomes more complex and the weaker break. And finally, the reestablishment of that leg is permanently weakened. And you see this in a person who involves themselves too much in displacement of their own line of command. So intuition, to me, its extraordinary value is that we have access to whole structures of truth and important facts which do not break the vertical line of command. So we do not risk weakening permanently this structure. This is important. This is one of the enormously important things about following through on intuition and knowing how to use it. We don't have to depend upon an astral plane entity to come over and give us some really secret messages of high importance, so on and so on. Or, let's say, a medium. We've got these inside of ourselves, even when we haven't got Baba right around us. If we need a part of it, somewhere or another, I'm convinced he'll get intuitively the material through to us. Now, we're getting awfully close to the end of the second 2 hours. Tom, how did you waste so much time this morning? What about you, Harry? What are you up to?
I'm just thinking, Don, sitting here and hearing your comments and Tom and everybody else's, I think an incredibly important part of the intuitive process, getting better at it, is what's happening here, which is just becoming more aware of it.
We are a small laboratory, right here and now.
It's like you just got to the 12 steps. You know, the first step is to recognize that you have a problem. And once you recognize that, you set it into motion, you know, just a level of recognition that you start dealing with it. So I think this a huge thing is happening right here, in that we're becoming more aware of the intuitional process. In our own lives, we're going to start refining it and refining it and refining it. So I think a tremendous thing is happening right here.
And don't forget the function that a small group of real companions with interlink can have in this very essential process. And also don't forget the fact Baba would not have said, intuition is my avataric gift to humanity. And that is a huge statement and a huge responsibility that's implied in it.
He did say that. Do you remember the instance?
God, I was sitting right with Baba when there were 3 or 4 other people in the room. Isn't it strange, you know? In fact, Baba brought this up when I was around at least 3 or 4 times during the course of the years. So it wasn't a happenstance. And always, this is my avatar gift. Sometimes he'd say this about it to embellish, and sometimes he would say that about it. For instance, the first time I heard it, he didn't say anything about, be sure that you're not tempted to throw logic and reason away because they're have an important secondary role. There are various different things he said at different times, but he said this, and it was always, it is my avataric gift to mankind, as love was Jesus Christ. And he would give the 1 or 2 other examples. But there's no question. When we were talking about this for the first time up in Washington and Oregon, I was shocked. I was stunned. Several of the most knowledgeable and deeply loving Baba people I know said, and that's the first time I ever heard that, or I'd never read it. So apparently, this is not engraved into the records. Simple, straightforward question, and I'll try to give you, let's say, the Stevents formula, what I worked out for myself the hard way over the years, and it undoubtedly won't be the Mahu, but maybe it'll give you some ideas, Mahu. I certainly found that I began to suspect when I was going to get into an incident in my own personal life in which a fairly important Stephen Sanskara was going to be involved. And when I sensed this intuitively, that it was going to come along, I would do my little go aside and have my out loud conversation with Baba, and I would tell him about the situation that was going to come up, and just say, Baba, I realize that this is very likely to be an important learning situation for me related to a samskara. And I would describe to him as simply as I could what I saw of the outlines of what was developing. And then I would always say to Baba, Baba, I will do my best to open my heart to you in the situation. And I did not ask him for a solution. I didn't ask to avoid it. I didn't ask for any particular thing. I just said, I will do my best to open to you as it arises. So when it would come up, then I would do my best to open up to him. Simply leave myself open to developments, even to the expression of extreme anger. I wanted to have absolutely no holds barred in this process as it went along. And after it was over, I'd go back and I'd have my out loud report and say, oh, Baba, this happened, that happened. I felt like a louse there, but that was really the way I felt. So this process of, let's say, sensing something, opening to Baba as best as I could, is very important. But there's another part of it that I wanted to tell you about, Mahu, which is also very important to me. I'm sure I've described this before here in Los Angeles. And maybe you're even familiar with the term that I use once in a while when I was writing about a few things. I call it the neutral plateau. I was impressed by Mercer Martin that one of the greatest user-uppers of our psychic energy, which we need for advance on the spiritual path, is absorbed in our fits of anger. Baba, of course, concentrates on worry. He says nothing uses up more of this psychic energy that is necessary than worry. And so the first initial simple lesson on the spiritual path is don't worry, be happy. That's where that came from, you see. So I had been told by Mercer Martin that I should take a careful look at my anger when it suddenly raised up. Well, I've never been a terribly angry person, but when I'd get mad, I'd get mad. You know, I could storm and steam and stomp my foot and whatnot. So when the first time after she had impressed that on me, I was in a situation I got angry. Afterwards, I felt ashamed of myself. And I noticed I was trembling and I was all tensed up for some odd minutes afterwards. So I saw the reality of what she was talking about. It took a lot out of me, and it took me a fair amount of time to get over it and back to some state of relative equilibrium. So, I'm sorry, water doesn't do any good, so I have to warn you about that. It's just a drippy sinus. So the next time that I thought, gee, I think I'm going to get angry again, I deliberately looked at the mechanism of what was going on inside of me. And I can do that with my mind. I guess I've got an analytical mind. I can divide it into two parts, and one part can rage and stamp, and another part can look what's going on here, you know, as a clinical diagnostician. So, as I was about to get into this, I said, boy, this is going to be a rip-roaring lollapalooza of an anger this time. And so I thought it's going to be a perfect specimen to see, diagnose. And so, came along, and the guy had said so-and-so and so-and-so, and I was about ready to rip loose and get mad and stomp my foot and call them all sorts of names. And I stopped just momentarily, and I was astonished at what I observed. I was not angry inside of myself. But I was on the brink of becoming angry, and I could either get angry or not get angry. There was a fraction of a second before the adrenaline gland pumped the adrenaline into the system, and then all hell broke loose. But there was a fraction of a second of just sheer emotional neutrality. It was there. And so I said to myself, that is fascinating. I wonder if there's some way that I can control that time period of just sort of neutrality. So the next time I got in that situation, I just deliberately said, no, I'm going to postpone getting angry for a second or two. It worked. You know, it's just like talking to my body much later in my life. What I hadn't dreamed could work did work. So I said, well, if a second or two is possible, maybe we do it some more. Then I began to notice something extraordinary. This is important. It has to do with what you're asking, about what you can do about samskaras. This to me is fundamental. Samskaras are a knot of psychic energy, and when they open up, they explode, and the energy is there. Normally, this energy goes into uncontrolled action, and we make all sorts of mistakes when we put our foot into it. We get friends mad at us and other people ashamed of us and so on. So this is what just spontaneous, reactive, sound scary explosions do to us. But I noticed when I postponed it a couple of seconds, and then I postponed it the next time a few more seconds, maybe 2-3 minutes even, I noticed I could just see these swirling clouds of psychic energy that were going around. You know what was happening? Some of them were floating off into space. And so when I decided to get angry, there weren't nearly as many still left around. And I realized I had a much more controlled and rational reaction in that situation than I normally had. So I said, this business, and I called it at that point the neutral plateau, You're not pushed here or there, up or down. You're just in a place of neutrality. So I said, I'm going to have to enlarge this. And I would just deliberately enlarge it for a few minutes and let the thing swirl around, and I would observe it. I wouldn't even contemplate what I was going to do. I wouldn't allow myself that luxury. I just watched this energy pattern swirling around. And then I would go ahead and act. And to me, let's say, knowing that there is a neutral plateau that we can use to let some of this energy dissipate, we've got to act sooner or later. And we've got to act realistically, as Joyce was saying over there. It's a practical matter. But then it is much more under control, and it's much more likely that we do far less damage, or we might even be constructive in our action. Mabu, that's my answer back to your very good, straightforward question. And somewhere or another, I didn't get exhausted that way. It didn't beat it out of me. I think we're just going to have to say it's time to call an end to our session on intuition together, and thank good old friend Tom Hickey for coming all the way from Idaho to join in with us. Tom, thank you so much. We be silent with Bob for just a few moments. Dearly beloved Baba, all is in your loving heart. Amen. Thank you again for the privilege of being back with a lot of good old companions.
Thank you.